Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to this another episode in our special series on the REINS Act, the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour Podcast, REINS Act in Focus. I'm Andrew Langer. Joining me right now is Patrick Gleason, a longtime colleague on these public policy issues. He is Vice President of State Affairs for Americans for Tax Reform. And Patrick, let's talk about the concept of a REINS Act, why that's important, and what's happening in the states with their versions of the REINS Act.
Yeah, so, this is an example of an idea that came from Washington that a lot of folks in the states thought, hey, that's a good idea, even though it hasn't passed in Washington. Give you a little bit, step back with a little bit of timeline. So 2009, the first federal REINS Act is introduced in Congress, and multiple versions have been subsequently introduced, with the most recent iteration sponsored by Senator Paul in the Senate and Congresswoman Kamak on the House side, but has yet to pass. We hope it does one day. But in the meantime, a number of states looked at that and said, hey, we could use a state level equivalent of that. And so you've had Florida enact the first one in 2010. The second didn't come till 7 years later. Governor Scott Walker enacted the nation's second in Wisconsin. Then Kansas followed suit. And going into this year, you had states had a REINS or near REINS style law on the books. That was going into this year when we had a lot of progress. But the concept is similar to the Federal REINS Act, which is, so the federal level, 100 million, anything with the economic cost, any regulation or rule with the economic cost of $100 million needs up or down vote in Congress. It's the same concept applied to the states, but just as you can imagine, different dollar amounts. So give you an example at the state level, the two most recent states that have passed state level REINS Acts, Louisiana's, which was just signed into law by Governor Jeff Landry earlier this month, that subjects any state rule or regulation that has a cost of $200,000 in a single year. Yeah, that's a pretty low bar to clear. Or 600,000 over a 6 year period. That is the cost trigger. In North Carolina, for example, you have it's 100 million over a 5 year period.
Okay.
So you have so 100 million over a 5 year period. So anything basically could be 20 million a year over a 5 year period, and that would trigger an up or down vote in the state legislature. So you've seen state level equivalents of these things. A lot of them, some of them had like $1 million a year cost, but we had 6 going into this year, and we've had tremendous progress since then this year, which I'm happy to talk about. But yeah, looking at the concept is generally the same as the federal, just different dollar amounts.
Well, let's talk about this from a general public policy precept and the great work you guys do at Americans for Tax Reform, which is the issue of regulation as a tax. It's something we haven't interviewed Steve Moore yet. We're about to. He and I have spent a lot of time talking about this. But you and I, before we started recording, you were mentioning this as another part of the suite of issues, SUITE, suite of issues ATR works on. Talk about the fiscal implications or the economic implications, the regulation as a tax.
Yeah, so taxes, as many people can explain, impose a cost, just they do it more opaquely than taxes do, less directly, more opaquely, but a cost nonetheless. And the folks at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, who I imagine you're talking to, they put out a great report every year, the 10,000 Commandments report, that shows the cost. They tabulate the cost of federal regulations. It's a great resource. I encourage folks to check it out. And they found a couple of years ago recently that the cost of federal regulations had now exceeded annually the cost of personal and corporate income tax collections federally. So you now have the cost of regulations is not only is it a cost just like taxes are a cost, just less direct and more opaquely imposed, but it's so great now, at least at the federal level, you have it exceeding personal and corporate income tax collections. And so same thing is going on at the state level. We have the same problem with state regulatory burdens and the need to rein those in. And so that's why that's been something that ATR is focused on. We've supported a host of deregulatory reforms over the years, things peeling back onerous regulations, whether it's certificate of need requirements, or if it's things like preempting local regulations, harmful local regulations. But the REINS Act is kind of the newest wrinkle, and it is really a preemptive safeguard, whereas the Congressional Review Act from 1996 would allows Congress to go back and review and subject to up or down vote regulations. This is more preemptive, stopping them beforehand. So whereas the federal REINS Act is kind of an expansion, an improvement upon the Congressional Review Act of the '96. These state level REINS Acts really provide, similar to the federal REINS Act, that preemptive safeguard against these, which is important because, as with taxes, regulations come with significant costs. So that's why ATR's worked on these over the years. And we've had a lot of success in bringing down income tax rates in the states. And in fact, since 2000, you've had over half of the states in the country, so not just red, but a lot of blue states and purple, have enacted income tax rate reduction. We've also had a lot of success in bringing, expanding school choice. But if you look at regulatory burdens, I think this is one of the newest trends, which is states getting on the board of enacting a state level REINS Act. So we went from 6 at the beginning of this year. We're now at 11 with Louisiana's enactment this month. And if North Carolina, they just sent one to the desk of their Democratic governor, they'll need to likely override a veto for that to become law. But if that does, we'll now have a doubling of what we started the year, a dozen REINS Act states.
What I appreciate about the work that you do, and the work that ATR has done, certainly in helping to bridge or create networks between state-based organizations. You guys do a great job. Our colleagues at the State Policy Network, we're going to be talking to some of those folks the next couple of days. But the point is, when we talk about the sort of the incubators of democracy, and I'm not sure I like that term, but or the free market of ideas, so much of the experimentation, laboratories of democracy, so much of the good ideas come out of these states. When it comes to regulation, looking at, as you point out, Louisiana and Florida and North Carolina. Idaho is a prime example of this when it comes to regulatory issues. And you may not be quite as familiar with Idaho, but talk about, not just when it comes to the REINS Act, but how these good ideas time out, because, right, the REINS Act was born out of an idea a constituent of Rand Paul's came up with in Kentucky, then came to DC and now is going back to the states. But let's talk about some of these great ideas on regulation that are happening in the implementation in the states.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the exciting things about working at the state level, is because you can not only do is you can see ideas get enacted more quickly, but you can take good ideas from one state
Right.
that have proven to work to another. But also, what's funny is sometimes even in a state or a certain venue where you don't get across the finish line, someone else can look at it and say, "Hey, that was a good idea." So, for example, the federal REINS Act, we haven't gotten it passed yet. We got it through the House a couple of years ago. Still haven't gotten it enacted, although we now have, for the first time ever, a presidential endorsement of it. But the states jumped on that, and so while we haven't gotten it done federally yet, we now have nearly, by the end of this year, we're on track to have a quarter of the states in the country
Amazing.
having done it. And so they're going to help show us, the value of it, and hopefully that'll make it more likely that we get a federal REINS Act, having shown this is proven to be effective. At the state level, same thing. We've seen states emulate and even go beyond other states. I'll give you a great example: North Carolina, which kind of kicked off the income tax reducing and flattening and phasing out revolution that began a little over a decade ago. They started in 2013. Arizona lawmakers saw that, and they said they liked what North Carolina did by bringing down rates, particularly using revenue triggers over time. But they not only did they emulate it, but they went beyond it. So North Carolina is now at a 4.25 flat rate, and Arizona went down to a flat 2.5. So you can emulate and go beyond. And for example, talking about, even if you don't get across the finish line, someone else can take it and run with it and enact it. Texas this year, where we thought was going to be the first state to prohibit taxpayer-funded lobbying, prohibit local governments from hiring contract lobbyists who often lobby against things like tax limits, property tax limitation, also lobby against preemptive measures that limit local tax and regulatory powers. Would have been the first state to do that. While they didn't get it done this year, sadly, only got through one chamber. I'm optimistic, having talked to legislators in other states, we can likely get it done in Tennessee or Florida, or maybe even North Carolina
Wow.
or South Carolina in the next year, which is great because Texas won't come back into session until 2027 unless they have a special. So yeah, just example, you can see great ideas Whether they're enacted, states can take it, adopt them, even go farther, and even places where you can't get it across the finish line, someone can take it and run with it. And so we see a
Amazing.
lot of examples of that, where regulatory relief is certainly a big one. And I think that's why we're seeing REINS Act take off so well, is because states are seeing they're in competition with each other, not just to make
Right.
not just to make their tax climate as hospitable as possible, but also their regulatory climate. And
Without a
so
doubt.
that's why I think we've seen such tremendous expansion. Six at the beginning of this year to now about to be 12 REINS Act states, 100% increase. Pretty exciting. Hopefully, we'll get a federal REINS Act. Maybe after they get the big, beautiful bill done, they can get to some other things.
Here, here. Hey, Patrick, before I let you go, how many states are you guys doing their versions of the coalition meetings in?
Oh, there's 42 states now have a meeting in the state capitol. And yeah, so this is they're typically monthly. Some of the states though do go
Yeah.
weekly when their state legislatures in session, such as Texas and some other states, but at least monthly. And they're modeled after the Wednesday meeting in DC, which I know
Yeah.
you would know well, but for listeners, a lot of folks from the Hill and also the business community and the policy community get together. Same thing at the state level. So whether it's state legislators and their staffers or policy groups, state think tanks, state taxpayer groups, state chambers of commerce, and NFIB folks from the states, trade associations, we all get together, at least on a monthly basis. So yeah, 42 states.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Listen, we got to leave it there. Patrick Gleason, Vice President of State Affairs for Americans for Tax Reform. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Great to be with you.
Check them out, atr.org. This has been yet another episode of our special series, The REINS Act in Focus. I'm Andrew Langer.